Notre Dame really went out there and dismantled the Georgia Bulldogs in the Sugar Bowl to secure the biggest win for the program in decades. How the Irish got it done and what they need to improve upon in order to beat Penn State is all coming up on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and we are coming at you with a special Sunday edition of the show following Notre Dame's win over the Georgia Bulldogs in the college football playoff. Thanks for making this your first listen of the day on Sunday, January 5th. And while you're here, please take a second to hit that subscribe button on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you might be tuning in today if you have not done so already. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, I know I say this a lot, but I am so excited for today's show. This is arguably the most excited I've ever been to do this show because we get to talk about Notre Dame's dismantling of the Georgia Bulldogs in a college football playoff game. I get jacked up just saying that out loud. And joining me today is Luke Smith, my former co-host on a different podcast. And Luke and I have been doing shows together for like 5 years now, and we have never been able to talk about a win quite like this one because, frankly, it has not happened during either of our lifetimes. So today, we're going to break down our biggest takeaways from Notre Dame's win over the Bulldogs, and we're going to discuss the three things we liked and didn't like from the game before we start to turn the page to the game against Penn State in the Orange Bowl. Let's go. All right, Luke, you and I have been doing this a long time, and frankly, we have not seen a win that was as big and as important as what Notre Dame did in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. They win 23-10. I feel like the score doesn't tell you the whole story. It felt closer during the actual game action. But now that you had some time to think about it and sort of reflect on what exactly transpired in New Orleans, what's your biggest takeaway from the win?
I think my perspective on that is that there's just an air around Notre Dame right now that's unlike any other I've experienced. And what I mean by that is just, like you said, not something we've ever seen before in our nearly 3 decades of life. But similarly, like just the way that this team continues to find ways to win games and win games convincingly at that. It's really impressive, especially when you look at all the factors that went into this ball game, and it really ended up not mattering. Notre Dame was just going to win this game. They were going to find a way to beat Georgia and move on to the next round. And it feels like a singular focus on just kind of like one day at a time, like let's embrace all this nonsense around us and get onto it. But I don't know when that switched. I guess most people would probably assume it's with NIU, but I think that's easier said than done. Like, I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but it has happened, and it's really fun to observe.
Yeah, something I've noticed from all the people who love Notre Dame, watch every game, listen, consuming all the Notre Dame content they can, they're not like surprised that Notre Dame beat Georgia. Obviously, I think a lot of us felt like Notre Dame could and should win that game. But I think there's a lot of people on the outside, people who care about college football, but maybe they tune Notre Dame out after that loss to Northern Illinois, and they've just seen Notre Dame on the stage so many times in the past. They were shocked that Notre Dame not only won the game, but they won in the manner that they did because They won by 13 points. They've now won, 12 games in a row, 11 of which now by double digits. So this team is on an insane run, and they're doing it just by beating the crap out of teams. Like physically, their athleticism is on full display all the time now, and we'll get into that as we get into the three things that we liked here. But I just was blown away by the response. Like even the biggest Notre Dame haters were like, wow, this Notre Dame team really is different. And even though we as fans already kind of knew that, the fact that this team is getting the attention and appreciation that they deserve is honestly just really encouraging to see.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously feel pretty strongly about them going up against Penn State and their ability to continue to move on in this thing. But I think the other big takeaway, right, is that this season now is unequivocally a success for Marcus Freeman and his program. And I don't think that should be taken for granted, much like the dominance Notre Dame has played with all year. That should be taken for granted either. I mean, you mentioned 11 straight wins, 10 of which by double digits. 12 of their 13 wins this year are by double digits. The only one that wasn't was the Louisville game, and that was a 2-score game until a late touchdown by Louisville. There really haven't been many moments of like pure drama where they're holding on at the end. And I know there was the USC drive and the 2 pick sixes, but like we haven't had that like waiting on a last second thing. And it's really impressive. And I think probably hasn't gotten enough conversation.
Yeah, I don't know if you felt this way, but during the actual game, I was extremely stressed out, even when Notre Dame was up by 13. I just think that's part of being in it and trying to accept in your mind, like, wait, is this really happening right now? Notre Dame is going to end up winning this game by 2 scores. But then when I rewatched it, obviously, you have the comfort of knowing that Notre Dame is going to come out with the win. But you watch that second half, especially like really after that Jaden Harrison touchdown return, that was kind of it. Even though Georgia ended up scoring a touchdown there, the Cash Jones play was a coverage bust, and Georgia did have a little bit of momentum there. When Notre Dame got that field goal, Mitch Jeter came up huge yet again in a big-time game, like in the 2 biggest games of the season, Texas A&M and Georgia. He's been nails. So I think it's funny when you rewatch it, you're like, wow, Notre Dame was actually in total control. It just didn't really feel like that in the moment. That's at least how I felt.
Yeah, and I think like you're right. There's definitely moments of stress associated as you're watching that game, but I think what I started to realize was Notre Dame goes for it on 4th and 1 at midfield, doesn't get it. And then they stop Georgia on 4 plays. And it's like, okay, well, that was an opportunity for Georgia, and Notre Dame just shut it down. And as I reflect back on, as I was watching kind of the 4th quarter of that game, and maybe this is a little bit of a loser mentality, but I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, the only way Georgia is going to win this game is if we have like a tipped pass interception and they get the ball at like the 5-yard line. Like that was like, I didn't think their offense was going to do anything against their defense, and really they didn't. So I was kind of thinking, just run the ball. Like, let's hold on to the ball for as long as possible. Like, not trying to be as aggressive because that's how I felt the only way Georgia was going to have a shot is if they got a short field at like the 10, 15-yard line, because just Notre Dame's defense stymied them pretty much all day.
Yeah, I think it's just years and years of scars and pain and misery to just assume the worst thing is going to happen at all times. I know that I'm conditioned to think that way, probably more so than most, but I certainly felt it in that moment. But then, as I rewatched it, I was like, wow, Notre Dame was in total control, and there's so many big things that we want to talk about. But let's get into the 3 things we liked, because I think as I look at this game, something I said in the post-game reaction show was this is a game that was won in the offseason. What I mean by that is college football is such it's a business, right? And it's a talent acquisition business, and it starts at the high school recruiting level, but now more than ever, the transfer portal is a huge factor in constructing your roster. And this really felt like the transfer game for Notre Dame, because every single transfer other than Chris Mitchell that Notre Dame brought in this past season, they each had a huge moment in this game. I already talked about Mitch Jeter, 3 for 3 on field goals. Riley Leonard was the leading rusher in this game by more than double compared to anyone else on either side. I think his 3rd and 7 run there is going to go down in Notre Dame history, because he beats the Georgia edge defender, and then he's one-on-one with Malachi Starks basically right at the first down marker, just jumps over him, talks some trash to him after. Like, we could talk about the 90 passing yards. We're going to get to that. That's not really great, but hey, he did what he had to do to win the game. Bo Collins, wide receiver from Clemson, he caught the only Notre Dame offensive touchdown in this game. Jaden Harrison, kickoff return for a touchdown. We've been waiting to see that all year. He finally does it in the biggest moment. RJ Oben, who's been largely absent this season, came up with the biggest defensive play of the season with his forced fumble on Gunnar Stockton before the half. Rod Hurd getting in on the action. Great coverage on a 4th down stop. Jordan Clark pass breakup on 3rd down. Are we considering James Randall a transfer? I am, for the sake of this argument. He had his best game of the season. Like, every single one of those guys had a huge, huge moment in this game, and it really goes back to the effort and all the work that the Notre Dame coaching staff did in the offseason to put this team together.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to one of the things I was going to say is related to that, and some of those guys you already named. Like, really was a game of just unsung heroes or bit players stepping up. And I think you talk about the game being won in the offseason. Similarly, it speaks to Notre Dame's depth and just how they can have guys emerge and have performances. You mentioned RJ Oben, objectively been a disappointment this year since coming over from Duke, but that was the biggest play of the year, causing that strip sack that set up Notre Dame's touchdown before half. And junior Tui Halamaka, game of his career for a guy that came to college as a middle linebacker and was a 3rd stringer at Viper to start this year. You can't say enough about his performance. You also had Donovan Heinisch with a sack to end the game. I know that Al Washington has caught a lot of flack for recruiting shortcomings, but clearly just done an incredible job with this group this season.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you think back to when he was almost going to become the head coach at Boston College. Like, another thing that happened in the offseason, Notre Dame was able to retain almost all of their coaches. They did lose Chris O'Leary, but they're able to keep Mike Mickens around, and he was highly coveted. We know Al Golden and all the other guys in the staff are constantly getting attention, and that's because they deserve it. But that's another thing that goes back to my point about winning this game in the offseason. They were able to keep their coaching staff. They developed these guys. And a guy like Junior Tuihalamaka, who, like you said, is a third-string Viper, he was a top 150 recruit coming out of high school. Notre Dame put in a lot of effort. That was a big-time get for Marcus Freeman at the time. And you just look at the depth of this roster. Like, we've talked about the injuries so much, and they just keep bringing guys in. And the fact that the third-string Viper is a former top 150 prospect just speaks to the work and the effort that Marcus Freeman has done on the recruiting trail, because it's not just the transfer portal. This team is always going to be one that's really built and developed through high school recruiting. So to recruit at that level, the improved level that's really been there ever since Marcus Freeman came over as a defensive coordinator, and then you add in what they did in the transfer portal, that's how you go toe-to-toe with Georgia, who has been, and maybe still is, one of the most talented teams in college football every single year for like the past 8 years.
Yeah, it's impressive, and it's not something that I think I thought would happen this quickly either, right? Like, I know it's year 3 with Marcus Freeman, and some of this just goes out to how the sport has been spread out, and the talent maybe has to some degree, but it's not something that maybe I saw happening this quickly. And I think that is actually what maybe makes some of this win even harder to process, just because, like you mentioned, the scars of years past, it's not something you're used to seeing. And so it's like, how is this actually happening? And it did, and I'm not complaining about it, but it's just hard to process.
Yeah, there's a sense of disbelief there at the end, especially with the way that Notre Dame was doing it. Like, on that last drive, which I know you want to focus on here, is like, that sort of drive is not something that I ever would have guessed would have happened before the season, because we had been talking about the offensive line as the biggest question mark, and for good reason. Like, they had very little experience. They've had to reshuffle on the offensive line with all these different pieces. Rocco Spindler is battling through an ankle injury, and still they're able to come up big in the biggest moment.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that drive, because Notre Dame held the ball for 7 minutes and 36 seconds. They only went 41 yards, but they kept Georgia's defense off balance for 12 plays. And in the end, effectively closed out the game, overrun them with physicality. And I think an important thing to bring up here is that this is something that Notre Dame has failed to do effectively in the past. Think back to the Ohio State game last year. They had the opportunity to melt the clock away. Didn't happen. So what did Notre Dame do this offseason? They went out and got Mike Denbrock, and he and Marty Biagi and Marcus Freeman craft that fake punts, whatever the hell got him play you want to call it, and that allows Notre Dame to effectively melt the clock away and end the game. So it was all building towards this moment. There had been opportunities in the past that Notre Dame had where they kept coming up short, and for them to close out this game and get this 31-year big bowl game monkey off their back in the fashion that they did, just out physicaling Georgia. It's hard to imagine a better way for that to end. And you already brought up the Leonard 3rd and 7 run, but I saw Georgia fans calling Leonard slow in the lead up to the game. So what a moment for him to hurdle their All-American safety and pick up that first down, getting to the edge around Georgia defenders on that 3rd and 7.
Yeah, not only did he jump over him, you could see Malachi Starks when Riley Leonard's coming at him, like, he takes a step back. He's almost not scared, but he's like, oh my God, this is a freight train coming at me. And then he just clears him. But I honestly think that Georgia defense was shell-shocked after the Gotham play, because they commit the offsides. And after that, I think they were like, oh my God, this is really happening. Now they're in real danger. They showed guys in the Georgia sideline, and they were looking around like, oh my God, did that really just happen? If you watch it closely, Notre Dame, I don't want to say they got away with one, but Jadarian Price does move a hair, but it happens literally simultaneously with the Georgia defender. So that call is going to go against the defense every single time, especially when they're literally jumping on the ball. But I think everyone was shocked that they went. I don't think Notre Dame was expecting to run a play. I think Mike Denbrock told Pete Sampson from The Athletic after the game, they just hoped that Georgia would call a timeout. They didn't do it, but ultimately they got them to jump off sides. And from that point on, I think Georgia basically just gave up.
They kind of did. You're right. And what a way for that to kind of ice the game away. But it was definitely a shell-shocking moment for that defense, you could tell.
Luke and I still have plenty more to get to, including how Notre Dame's physicality was a huge difference in the matchup. But first, I got to tell you about this great new promotion courtesy of our friends at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. All right, here's my pick. How about we do a little Super Bowl pick, all right? So right now, you can get the Detroit Lions, yes, the Detroit Lions at plus 470 to win it all. And I understand that the Lions have had to deal with a rash of injuries, but hey, if Notre Dame can keep winning while they deal with a bunch of injuries, maybe the Detroit Lions can do the same. I love Dan Campbell, and I hope they win the Super Bowl. So I'm taking the Lions plus 470 to win it all. And you can visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Okay, the second thing that I liked is something that kind of goes back to my original point, how this game was won in the offseason. Because during the offseason, like all of us in the media, we're talking about transfer portal, recruiting, like all this stuff that happens away from the field. But meanwhile, the actual team, the players, the ones that really matter, they're grinding in the weight room, they're doing conditioning, they're running, they're getting into shape for the season to be able to play in games like this in early January. And I thought Notre Dame's physicality and their athleticism and conditioning was on full display in this game because I remember like even during the early days of the Brian Kelly era when Notre Dame was actually starting to get good again, like back in 2015 and even dating back to 2012, I remember watching, I believe it was the SEC Championship or maybe it was just a playoff game with two SEC teams. And I was watching it with my dad and we were talking about how even though Notre Dame was good, it's still, when you're watching the teams at the tippy top of the sport, it just felt like you're watching a different sport because their defense was so fast, they were so physical, and they just could go and go and go. And even when Notre Dame had good seasons, like back in 2018 and 2020, those teams were built on defense, but then when they played the best teams, they weren't as fast, they weren't as big, they weren't as strong, and they weren't able to go for the whole game. That is not the case anymore. So whatever gap that existed from that standpoint, I do still think that there's a gap in terms of like being able to recruit at the best and doing this on a season-to-season basis, getting to this point. But I just think when you look at the roster, what Notre Dame has, the gap in athleticism, strength, all that stuff, that is closed. And that was really evident on the first play when Georgia tried to run that like outside sweep and Notre Dame's defenders were just all over it. You kind of knew like, oh, this Notre Dame defense, like we already knew it was different, but now getting to see it against a team like Georgia, it really has closed.
Yeah, and I think another important part of this is that they answered the bell when Georgia did come out and played physically and athletically too. Like Notre Dame's first offensive drive was not inspiring at all. I mean, Riley Leonard kind of looked scared out there, to be totally honest with you. And then as the first quarter went on, like Georgia did have some success moving the football, and it all sort of changed when Adon Schuler just laid the wood to ETN, causing his first fumble of his collegiate career. That's a guy that's going to play in the NFL. And that was sort of when I think Georgia was once again shell-shocked, like, whoa, these guys, they're just like us, if not better or more athletic. And I don't think that that's what they were expecting. Like, there could probably be a whole separate podcast on Georgia's shortcomings because I kept hearing people say this was Kirby Smart's best coaching job. I think it's one of his worst, honestly. Like, just like they were so inconsistent throughout the year. I know they were hurt by arrests and injuries at receiver, but I was so unimpressed with just how they were organized or not organized out there. And I really don't. I think that probably goes on coaching. So that's just me. But this felt like to me a situation where Georgia didn't really take Notre Dame that seriously. And then when Adon Schuler comes out there and lays the wood like that, that got them off balance even more. So I think the answering the bell like that was really important.
I can tell you the fans did not really take Notre Dame that seriously before the game. You kind of saw that. I feel like most people in the college football media, even if they were picking Georgia, most people understood that this is going to be a very close and physical game. But I think the fans are just so conditioned to think that they're going to roll over everyone, especially a team like Notre Dame, who they just don't have really any respect for anyone outside of the SEC, but particularly Notre Dame because they've just been dominated on the big stage. I think that play from Adon Schuler was a big wake-up call to everyone over there in Dog Nation. That actually leads me to the third thing I liked because The secondary, but specifically Adon Schuler, Xavier Watts, and Leonard Moore, they're like on a different level right now. And Christian Gray has been struggling a little bit for sure, but Adon Schuler had one of the best games of his career. Led the team with 8 tackles, had that huge forced fumble, had a pass breakup, and had 4 run stops according to Pro Football Focus. Xavier Watts was right behind him with 7 tackles. He had a tackle for loss. Leonard Moore, as a corner, had 5 tackles and a tackle for loss, 3 run stops. And even though they targeted him 6 times in coverage, he gave up that 1 pass on the sideline and the back shoulder. But other than that, he was nails, had 2 pass breakups, and really set Georgia behind the chains because on that last drive, for whatever reason, Mike Bobo decided to call a wide receiver screen. Didn't really get that at the time, but I sure appreciated that. Who was there to make the stop? Leonard Moore. Like I've talked about it before, his tackling ability as a true freshman cornerback is unheard of, and they are just playing lights out football right now, and I think that they are going to continue to lean on them the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I think that this is another good comparison to make just like kind of the evolution of how this thing has gone, because growing up, really, Notre Dame secondary was the bane of our existence. Like they had no match for SEC teams out there. They just had guys getting cooked. And now for that group to arguably be the strength of the team, like I don't want to just discredit the linebackers entirely because I thought they were awesome too, but they probably are the strength of the team. That's just it's a far way from where we came.
So you're telling me that guys like Gary Gray and Darren Wallace couldn't have held up in a game
I'm not sure that would have gone so well for them.
I know. It's nuts watching these guys just continue to ball, and the things that they ask them to do. Like Al Golden, Mike Mickens, they trust them to play man coverage. They play Xavier Watts to make plays in the run game, even though he's playing from depth, and they just do it time after time after time. So this secondary, this whole defense is incredible. Like we could go on and on about Jack Kaiser. Drake Bowen was phenomenal in this game. He really set the tone when he trucked Gunnar Stockton early on. But I just think what the secondary is doing, they're just on a different level.
They are. And I think the whole team is just truly the belief around this team. I've already alluded to this is something that is very unique. They have this belief that they're going to continue to find ways to win games and do so convincingly. Let's take a step back here. Notre Dame won a game against Georgia by 2 scores in a game where Riley Leonard threw for 90 yards and Jeremiah Love, clearly not healthy, had 6 carries for 19 yards. They played without 2 of their best players on defense in Riley Mills and Benjamin Morrison, and X Watts and Howard Cross also suffered injuries during the game. You already talked about Spindler playing injured. The Notre Dame offensive line down 3 starters from opening day camp, still battled. And despite all that, they achieved their 12th win by double digits. The only game they haven't won by double digits this year, like I said earlier, is Louisville game. And that could have easily been a 2-score game. So with all that in mind, like there's really no reason not to believe that they're going to go out there and find a way to beat a Penn State team who, while they're talented, hasn't been as consistent as Notre Dame has been this year, despite getting literally every break for them, as well as ranking, path, just benefit of the doubt, generally speaking, from everybody, and not saying they're not a good team, but I think this is time when they're going to have to pay the piper here finally.
We'll see, man. It's nuts. Notre Dame is going to have to stop the rushing attack from Penn State, but they sure did a good job of it against Georgia. I think Georgia thought they'd go into this game and be able to run the ball all over Notre Dame because they didn't have Riley Mills, because Howard Cross is banged up. They held him to 66 rushing yards. They had 2.3 yards per carry. They had 1 long run. Nate Frazier had a 28-yarder. But other than that, man, this Notre Dame defense, but specifically the defensive line, because to your point, like the belief is there. Al Washington, they came out with that all-access clip and just basically said, we've been here before. Are they ready for it? Like they kind of embody everything that is great about this team because they just continue to deal with injuries and blows to their unit, but it just doesn't matter because guys just continue to step up.
Yeah, no, and I don't see any reason to think that won't continue to happen here in South Beach.
Before Luke and I analyze the things Notre Dame has to improve upon before they face Penn State, I want to tell you about Gametime, because attending the new 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of being at the Indiana game in the first round, and I cannot wait to make more new memories at games like that in the future. Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I used Gametime picks to find tickets for an LA Kings game, and it was such a great experience. Browsing through the deals was a breeze, and I found great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. The Super Deal in particular stood out as the best value for the event. I love that I could see the seat views before buying and that the app shows the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we've already started talking about Penn State. I do want to talk about the things that we didn't like from this game because there's a few things that they absolutely need to get cleaned up before they play the Nittany Lions. What stands out to you?
I think it's the struggles in the passing game. Outside of Jordan Faison, it honestly didn't really seem like Notre Dame's receivers were out there all day. Obviously, Bill Collins did actually make a tough catch on the touchdown throw. He had to fight for that a little bit, but Greathouse, Mitchell, and Harrison were quiet in the passing game. I don't even know that I saw Chris Mitchell out there that much. I don't know how many snaps
he played 12 snaps. They really tightened up the receiver snaps. Like even Jane Greathouse was only out there for 25 plays.
Okay, so obviously some of this was due to the game plan and how Notre Dame struggled at times with Georgia's pass rush. But I think I'd like to see Jaden Thomas get some more run in the Penn State game. He just kind of seems to deliver every time he's out there. And I think what's important, particularly if Jeremiah Love can't go or isn't going to be close to 100%, which if we're being honest, I don't think he is going to be close to 100% in this Orange Bowl. The receivers have to be a viable option out there. They have to at least be able to do something. Like I trust Jadarian Price to carry a big load in the run game, but they need some valid options out there. And Penn State has some decent cornerbacks, but nothing that I think Notre Dame can't handle if these guys play to their potential. That's something that needs to get cleaned up.
Yeah, the bar is low. We're not asking Notre Dame's wide receivers to go out there and have like multiple guys get 100 receiving yards, but it's got to be someone.
That's not going to happen all year. So
no, it's not. It's okay. They just beat Georgia with 90 passing yards. I don't know if they're going to be able to beat Penn State with 90 passing yards, but we're going to have to see this weekend. Now, I do think part of it had to do with the game plan. Like Notre Dame never really tried to push it downfield other than when they had the free play. They threw it deep to Bo Collins, but they're going to need to be more explosive because you just can't count on getting, a strip sack in their own territory right before the half, and you can't count on Jane Harrison to get another kickoff return for a touchdown. Like they did have an offensive touchdown in this game. They're going to have to get some more sustained drives to be able to beat Penn State and then potentially beat either Texas or Ohio State in the national championship. But for me, I think they really got to clean up the penalties. They had 10 penalties for 75 yards, and I don't think that the yardage, even though it's a lot, 75 is certainly a lot of penalty yards in any game, it doesn't tell the full story because these penalties happened on massive plays. The fourth down conversion late in the game that was wiped off because Jordan Faison wasn't set. I thought that was a little ticky-tack because considering how much motion goes on in all levels of college football, like guys aren't always fully set at the time of the snap. So I thought, even though, yes, I will admit he was going for it a little bit, either way, Faison cannot leave that up to the official in that situation because that was such a critical conversion. I also thought the fourth down conversion that was wiped off, or actually I don't think it was a fourth down, but it was the play when Faison came around for the end around. Notre Dame had 5 guys in the backfield. That would have basically ended the game because Notre Dame had the ball, first down, 2 minutes, 45 seconds left. Instead, that penalty brings him back, and Georgia was able to get the ball back. Like, it's little things like that. Jack Kaiser's pass interference penalty on fourth down. In the moment, I thought it was a weak call. Watching it again, he's just got to turn his head in that situation so that it's not left up to the official. And I also think Notre Dame got lucky on one of those running into the kicker penalties. I have no idea. It's kind of like what targeting is. Like, I don't know what targeting is or isn't. I have no idea what the difference is between running and a roughing at this point because one of those looked like roughing. So I don't really know what the deal is there, but I think overall, like, I'm okay with aggressive penalties, but it's the pre-snap stuff that is just infuriating, and they got to clean that up before Penn State.
Right. Yeah. I think from what I understand, they call roughing the penalty when you hit the plant leg is what I get. I don't really know. I definitely thought the first one was too. I will say that Kaiser pass interference was horrible. And Terry McCauley came out and said that is entirely too close for a foul to be called. That's a bad call. So when we have officials going out there and saying that like that, they usually kind of have each other's backs. And let's also not forget the fact that there was just a blatant hold on Jalen Snead on that play coming after the quarterback. Just really unimpressed with officials once again. Notre Dame needs to clean up some things, but it's the college football playoffs. Like, we have to have better refs in this. And even like the flag on Georgia for the kid tripping the guy on the sideline, that was an embarrassing flag from that ref. Like, I literally think he threw that because he was embarrassed that he fell down. And that is just, it's kind of like a dignity flag. And that should not happen in that setting.
Dude, did you see the tweet after the game when it was someone kind of making fun of the ESPN broadcast? They're like, that's number 39, Parker Jones. Parker Jones, number 39. His address is 316 like Maple Road.
Yeah.
I felt so bad for that kid.
I mean, when McElroy like right away calls him Bartman, I don't think he realized the irony of that Bartman went to Notre Dame.
Went to Notre Dame, yeah.
But yeah, I was like, guys, you got to drop this. Like, and then brought it up back at the end of the game. That just wasn't right.
Look, I think you have to call that because the ref collided with him. Like, you aren't going to get away with that if you literally collide. But the ref was pretty deep. Like, he was on the far outside white, like the edge of that white line. And you think about big plays in football games, like that could theoretically happen a lot more. But at first I thought it was going to be a warning because usually they give a sideline warning, but the fact that he hit him, like, they just didn't leave room for a warning. And I'm obviously very glad that they called that. But yeah, I think overall, I mean, we've talked about it before. College football officiating is really in a dire state right now. You look at the Texas-Arizona State game, like they review it for targeting. Somehow they don't call targeting there, and that could change the outcome of the game. I don't think there was any call in this game that had any chance to change the outcome, but still, there were a lot of points. Like, I felt, especially late in the game, like the only way Notre Dame is going to lose this is if they beat themselves, and they were beating themselves with penalties. Fortunately, it wasn't enough, but they got to clean that up a little bit because the pre-snap stuff especially is just infuriating.
Yeah.
All right, what's next for you on the things you don't like?
I know I've spoken to this resolve and wherewithal of this Notre Dame team to find ways to win games, but it really is unfortunate that they don't have some of their best players for the Final Four. The injuries just reached an absurd mark, and I know that every team is banged up. Like, who knows if Abdul Carter's even going to play or where he's at for this game this week, but it would just be way nicer to have a healthier squad going into South Beach, and they're not going to. Nothing you can do about it, but like, wow, it's reached a ridiculous level.
I know, and it's always the best players.
Yep.
Although, I mean, Notre Dame did lose another player for the rest of the season. Unfortunately, Cooper Flanagan, the backup tight end, appears to have suffered some form of an Achilles injury, I believe was the report. And we'll see how severe it is, but he's going to be out for the remainder of the playoffs. And it just seems like every game, man, there's one injury where the player is basically wiped out for the remainder of the season. And then you got Jeremiah Love tweaking his knee again. You got Xavier Watts now dealing with something. I believe it was a shoulder injury. So it just seems like not only is Notre Dame getting terrible injury luck, it's only happening to the best guys on the team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how else to describe it, but that does seem to be the nature of what's going on here.
Yeah, and really for me, the only other thing that I didn't like from this, it's similar to you. It's not just the injuries, it's just how mentally and physically draining that game was for everyone involved, because I'm exhausted and it's been a couple days and I was just watching the game. So I can't even imagine what it's like for the guys who are actually out there and the coaches and everyone who's involved, because even though Notre Dame won by 13 points, it took everything from everyone to get that win. And my biggest concern about Penn State really has nothing to do with them, even though I have respect for the roster. I think they're talented. They could absolutely end up beating Notre Dame in this game. But I think my biggest concern just has to do with the fact that this team has had to endure so much as of late. It's not just the injuries. It's playing a game against Georgia after what they had to deal with, being stuck in the hotel because of the tragedy that happened in New Orleans. And now they have even less rest going up against Penn State. Meanwhile, Penn State has had a cakewalk to this point, playing SMU in Boise, and they have more rest than Notre Dame. So there's a ton of built-in advantages for Penn State. Then you factor in the injuries and all that stuff. Like, it is just a lot to ask for any team to go out there, win a game like that against Georgia, and then turn around and play another hugely important game against a talented team in Penn State just a week later. Like if we saw that on a regular season schedule, you'd be like, oh my God, like that's insane. How would anyone do that? That's just the reality of playing in the college football playoff. It's not meant to be easy, but when you consider everything else that Notre Dame has had to deal with, it's just it's a lot to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a big ask, but I actually feel better about it because of the carrot that is there of having the opportunity to play for a national title. It's a lot more tangible. Like you're a game away from getting that opportunity. It's not like you're getting tripped up in the season. And frankly, like even Marcus Freeman's post-game interview, like normally he says, we're going to enjoy this one tonight and get on to whatever. He didn't say that. He said, we're on to Penn State right now. Like I think they are singularly focused on winning a title. And yeah, of course, I'm sure they enjoyed the fact that they beat Georgia, but like this team wants to keep going. And I thought that was interesting that he diverted from his original or his usual script with that. And I trust that he's going to have them ready to go once again.
Yeah. And I guess, in terms of the rest and the lack of preparation, I'm sure that the GAs and the guys on the staff, like the support staff, they were probably getting ready. They were helping out, starting to do some prep for the Penn State game, start to get some of the scouting reports done and all that in advance. But as you wrap things up here, how are you feeling about that matchup against Penn State? Because it's only a few days away. That is sort of the weird thing about the 12-team playoff is like in the 4-team, if Notre Dame had won a game like this against Georgia on this kind of stage, like you'd have a lot more time to let it sink in and really enjoy it, but not now. Like this happened. We're going to talk about Georgia today, obviously, but then, tomorrow it's flip the script at Penn State.
Famously, I have been critical of Penn State. Last year, I was pretty hard on Drew Aller. I'll admit that I think he has improved, but I'm not sure it's going to matter with Penn State's receivers going up against Notre Dame's secondary. I think what I'm most curious about in this game is the health of both Jeremiah Love and Abdul Carter. I think this is going to be a game very similar to the one that was just played, but I trust Notre Dame's going to find a way to come out on top and advance to the national championship game. I just do. I think they're better than Penn State, and I think that they have a better resolve than Penn State does. And it's been tested more often than Penn State's has. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll see how it all plays out. We'll put the ball down there and then let it roll out, but I'm excited for it.
Are you making the trip to Miami? Because I feel like you said you weren't going to do that after the Indiana game, but my sense is that things have changed.
I'll be there. I think the third time's going to be the charm for me in that stadium. It's going to be a quick business-like trip, but we'll be down there, and I'm really hopeful that third time's a charm in Hard Rock Stadium.
Yeah, you need to get some good energy crystals or something to bring in with you to try to exercise some of those demons in Hard Rock Stadium, because it has truly been a house of horrors for Notre Dame, but maybe it's good that they're going there now before the season opener next year when they open the season against Miami.
That is true. Yeah. And I mean, if we go back, the national title game, it was actually still Sun Life Stadium then, but it doesn't matter. It's a dump either way. So we'll see. Hopefully this time goes better.
Hey, at least you won't have to deal with any Hurricanes fans while you're there.
Knock on wood. Who knows? They might come out of the woodworks. So.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this game. I think it's cool that there's a lot of history to this because I feel like this is like an older rivalry. Like it hasn't really been a part of our lives, even though they had that home and home back in 06 and 07. But like hearing my dad talk about it and other people as well who are like back in the early 90s, like this was the game, huge matchup, right. Very similar programs. I think the teams are built very similarly. Both teams can really run the ball well. Notre Dame fans are going to get a dose of what they've been missing with Nicholas Singleton, although Notre Dame obviously has some great backs of their own. So I think it's going to be a great game. Haven't really done like a deep dive into Penn State yet. I do think my early lean is Notre Dame is going to win a close game. I actually think that this game is going to be a little bit closer than the Georgia game. I don't know why. Maybe just because of the hangover from playing Georgia. It's going to be hard to start out fast. But this team has proven me wrong time and time again this season, and I hope they do it again because if they end up blowing them out and we get to celebrate that, then, Luke, we're going to Atlanta.
Yeah, and that will be cool if we get that chance. And, yeah, I think you should continue to say these games are going to be close because you've said that a couple times in a row now, and it really hasn't been the case. So I think let's keep going with that narrative.
Yeah, I predicted 1 point win against Georgia. They certainly won more than that. Indiana, I thought it'd be a little bit closer. I guess the final score ended up being very close because I predicted 28-17. It was 27-17, but that was a lot of window dressing there at the end. But before we start talking about Atlanta and getting there, Notre Dame's got to win against Penn State first in Miami. So, Luke, it's great catching up. And hopefully next week we're doing this again. We're talking about that trip to Atlanta.
Yeah, can't wait. Sounds good. Go Irish.
All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Here's the plan for the rest of this week. Since I'm releasing this on a Sunday afternoon, I'm going to be back on Tuesday morning with my full preview of the Orange Bowl game against Penn State. Then on Wednesday, I'm hoping to have a special guest on to continue previewing that matchup, and I'll even have a new episode out for you on Thursday morning, the day of the game. We're planning on doing a crossover episode with the host of the Locked On Penn State pod, and hopefully that'll help get you through those anxious hours leading up to the game. And then I'll have another reaction show after the final whistle on Thursday night. So we've got a lot of exciting stuff on the show. So make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. Also, remember to like the video below if you are watching on YouTube, or rate the show 5 stars and leave a review if you're listening to the pod. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you on Tuesday.